there's this tension between growing a business as big as you can and focusing on quality, integrity. And I think one company that seems to have done that well is Spotify. And you were at the center of global business ops. What did you learn there about trust and product market fit together with scaling with integrity, like I mentioned?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I call Spotify the 8-year overnight success or the 10-year overnight success. Um, One of the things that was really powerful about Spotify, and I think why it had so much success and continues to have success, is that it did not start in the United States. It started off in Sweden. Um, and originating there, I think they had a chance to really experiment with the tools, the technology, in a market that was rampant with piracy, just as the US was, but in a smaller market.
Is
Um,
this like during Napster or shortly after Napster?
yeah, it's after Napster. I think it was just post Napster. This is during, like, we'll call it the iTunes era, but also at the same time as like LimeWire and some of these other softwares that were out there. I was not a part of Spotify then, just to be clear, but I think having this originating in Sweden and not in the United States really gave them a chance to experiment and gave the platform a chance to come up with solutions that could help really drive the user engagement that they had early on. I think that also showcased the labels that there was a viable model here that was not piracy. And then when Spotify came to the United States, I joined relatively early in that journey. I want to say I was close to one of the top like 20 or 30 employees in the United States when they first came to the States. And I think to your question on product market fit, it was really about this idea of how do you find the best product that can meet the need of the user. Originally, Spotify was a desktop product, right? You were on the laptop or a desktop computer. And I remember being in a meeting with the leadership team, and Daniel Ek, the CEO of Spotify, had said, like, he was looking at the data, and the data showed that almost 90% of all new registrants were coming in through mobile. And in that meeting, he declared that we would be a mobile first company from this point forward, which is a pretty big shift, right? So going from being a desktop product to really, creating a software and a service on the mobile device was a pretty big shift for the premium business, which is a subscription business, but also for the free ad supported business. So that was a pretty big shift. And I think that's where the product market fit piece came in. Understanding the data, realizing there was this big shift that was happening in terms of usage from a desktop platform to a mobile platform,
Hmm.
and then building the software to really meet the user where they are. I think that comes along with it. The other big part about integrity is like not focusing on building products or solutions just for the sake of building products and solutions, but really listening to the user, understanding their pain points, helping them with not only playing music, but also discovering music. So, and living up to that real mandate back then, which was focused on music. It was obviously the platform has evolved. And there's a lot more that's happening within audio across the Spotify platform today, but back then it was really focused on music.
You mentioned that music focus, and before Spotify, you were at Google, as I understand, also with global operations. What is the big difference there? What is Google's focus compared to Spotify, both culturally and as product market fit goes?
Yeah, I think, so I was fortunate enough to be at Google in the very early days. There were about 11 of us in New York
I'm
when I
sensing a
joined.
trend.
Yeah, I've been fortunate
Right place, right time.
across the journey. And then also, um, less than 11 people, or 11 people in New York, less than 200 people at the company. Um, I think similar to Spotify, really focusing on the user and everything else will follow. I think that was the mantra from the early days. So at Google, that really meant search was the core product in the early days. Obviously, it's much bigger now and covers a lot of different areas. But back in 2000, it was really search was the main product, and the integrity there was really having a very clean user interface, fast response with low latency to results, and getting the user the information they wanted so they can then go directly to that information and go on with their day. And I think that really served us well back then. I think it still is part of the mantra at Google today, I'm sure, but really focusing on that user journey, focusing on the experience that the user has, and really delivering something that continues to be of value, and in many cases surprises and delights the user. And I think that's what all great products do.
Could you take the product team at Google and swap them out with the product team at Spotify, and would things pretty much operate the same? Or are there some like intrinsic cultural differences that these are two separate DNAs?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, I guess my version of that answer would be, um, Google has a very Silicon Valley culture, at least when I was there, right? I think, and what that means to me is that there's a lot of the academic approach to product and service, a large kind of built-in network coming in from Stanford, and other universities in the California area.
Hmm.
Um, Whereas I think with Spotify, starting in Europe, I think a very different culture. So one of really as a team, winning together versus independent success is one example. The idea of design being a real focus. If you think about Sweden, I think it's a country. I'm not sure the exact number, but I think it's like a country of 8 million people. A lot of great companies with design ethics built into those companies starting there. Probably a few different things, but I guess the core of it really comes back to the same thing. How do you build great products and services that create experiences that users want to engage with? And while the business models are different and while the services focus on many different things, ultimately that is the core, right? And I think that's really the core of a lot of the products that are in market that do really well.
So I come from the lens of executive coaching and helping like empower people. And I have this concept, I don't know if I coined it, but it's something that I like to say, the superposition of accreditation. So on the one hand, you can have accreditation that kind of complements experience and kind of tools that you can apply. And on the other hand, you can have accreditation that kind of shields incompetence or a lack of ability. And you have to kind of discern as a business owner what kind of side you're speaking with and how much of that you can work with. And I noticed that your profile, if you don't mind me getting kind of personal, you have a bachelor's in history, but you're talking about being at the like the nexus of some of the biggest movements in tech and business of the last couple of decades. How do you hold those two in the same space? Like what did your bachelor's in history teach you about working with Stanford grads in Silicon Valley, and what is the gap there?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I definitely have a very different background from a traditional, let's say, call it a product or an engineering background, and that's not what I focused on. I really these companies that I worked at, a lot of it was really around operations, helping with commercialization on the business side, and I think if anything, bringing in a different perspective, right? The idea of being able to roll up your sleeves, experiment, and help to roll out products and services alongside the experts who built them, is
Mhm.
where I really found a lot of value. And I think in those cultures, to me, it was, I was, especially at Google, it was very early in my career. So I really looked at it as another learning experience, right? A lot of people talk about working at these firms where they didn't get their what call a traditional MBA, but they got their MBA in the work environment. And I was just fortunate enough to work with some of the smartest people in the in these spaces. So I took a lot of learnings from those
Mhm.
companies, and I apply them to what I do at 1848 Ventures today. So I do believe that it's an opportunity to always learn and then take
Mhm.
those learnings and apply them as you continue to grow your career or your business,
Mhm.
whatever it may be.
Yeah, I like that answer for a couple of reasons. One, it gives me an opportunity to share another coined phrase.
Sure.
Outsider insights is something I lived abroad for a while, and I noticed that on the face value, I was sometimes had difficulty kind of belonging in some capacities. But on the other side, I had some unique advantages because I had a different perspective. And then I eventually kind of broadened my view and realized we all have that. We're all coming from different backgrounds. And as long, I think, as you're self aware enough to know that I'm not building myself out as a neurosurgeon or something like that, I can then be curious about it and network with people who are and learn and contribute either interesting questions. To that point, I think that might be a direction that we're going with AI everywhere, as the computers or super intelligence knows more about all subjects than we possibly could. I think it's going to be more important to know what questions to ask. So I think that might have been a superpower that you had by the sound of it, just showing up and having that different perspective and the humility to learn from others and contribute how you could.
Yeah, and I think that was part of the culture at Google and also at Spotify and many of the almost every company that I've worked at. This idea of diverse perspectives really coming together to create either a product or a service or a business solution that could really help the constituent that we were working with. So I do think that that's an important part of the overall tech journey.
Mhm.
And the companies that do it well and really embrace that culture, I think have I think not only better cultures, but I think better products and services. I've also worked in environments where it's kind of a siloed approach, and kind of your opinion stays within that silo, and those companies don't do as well. So
Mhm.
I do like the fact that having the opportunity to spend time at some of the companies that I have where that culture is embraced, it's created a better, it's helping me throughout my career. And I think the contributions that individuals like myself have been able to make at those companies also stand out because of those experiences.
What are some operational lessons founders miss when they obsess over product and fundraising?
Yeah, I think on the product side, and I'll speak more to my experience at Sounder.ai, which was a podcast audio company that I started and we sold a little over a year ago at this point. I think obsessing over perfection from a product perspective, especially in the early days, is a disadvantage, I think, to a founder. The
Mhm.
idea of being able to get to market faster, being able to experiment, learn from the user, the customer, and really being able to develop from that point forward, I think is really important. So the idea of progress over perfection is something that we talk about quite a bit at 1848 Ventures, because you're never going to get it right on the first try, right? You need to
Not even
experiment. You need
close.
to learn from the customer. You need to learn from the end user, and ultimately, you'll create something better. And that iterative approach, I think, pays a lot of value. So my advice to founders, early stage founders and early stage companies is, try to get to market faster. When it comes to making decisions, I'm a big believer that a bad decision in those early days is better than no decision at all. As long as we quickly understand the decision that we've made, and if it's a bad one, what learnings are we taking away so we don't make that same bad decision again? I think
Mhm.
is an important part of that journey. And I think the second part of your question around fundraising. It's really a numbers game, right? So you need to be out there talking to as many investors as possible. You're probably going to go through quite a few rejections. I certainly did, and you will find the firm or the individual that does believe in your product, service, and really ensuring that you get a chance to really move that forward. I do think it really is making sure you continue to really practice that pitch, refine that pitch, and meet as many people as possible.
Yeah, great advice there. Great comments. A couple of thoughts come to mind as you shared your answer there. One was just how humbling it is to realize how much you don't know. As you get out there, there's so many blind spots, and it's a moving target. It's not static. So I think I would just stress you really need to be in the arena rather than waiting for your perfect entrance from the side. And then what you mentioned about fundraising and facing many rejections, many, well, I should say, several of funded founders that I've spoken with, brilliant people, mention more rejections than yeses. And that might seem kind of odd. Like you think of your MVP top athletes as having this like perfect record, but you're seeing the result of them having been built. And I think there's a lot about learning about your product, learning about business in the discussions with people, kind of poking and prodding and asking. And so you might not see your hair grow or grass grow, but in those quote unquote rejections or conversations, I think you're learning more about your business and better representing it. So it's I think a necessary step by the sound of it.
No, it really is. I always, and don't quote me on the exact number, but I think there was a quote by Roger Federer not too long ago that I think he missed over 50% of the points that he played or lost 50% of
Mm-hmm.
the points that he played, but still is obviously one of the elites in tennis. I'm a big tennis player, so that's where that comes from. But yeah, I think similarly here, like it's about, having the conversation, being able to understand the type of questions that you're getting from an investor, continuously refining that narrative and that pitch, and then finding the right investors who share the same passion about that industry or that product or service that you're looking to bring to market. And every single conversation is another opportunity to expand your network. And I think when you're in those early stages of building your company, the network is one point of leverage that you have. And the bigger you can build it, I think the more value it can create for you.
Fully agree. So you mentioned Sounder. There's also Iron Horse Tavern, and you also mentioned 1848 Ventures. What does your portfolio say about how you see the world now?
Yeah, so post Sounder, I had an opportunity to purchase a small business, which is a restaurant called the Iron Horse Tavern, which I'm a partner in now. And I would say it's one of my forays into really owning a small business, which has also helped me as I focus on my day job, which is 1848 Ventures. So I don't run the restaurant; I have partners who run it. Just to be clear, understanding the logistics, the mechanics, the software that we use has really helped as I really shape our vision for 1848 Ventures. So, just to give you a little bit on 1848 Ventures, we are a corporate venture studio backed by an insurance company out of Ohio by the name of Westfield Insurance. Our focus at 1848 Ventures is to build for the small to medium sized business segment or market, and we build AI native solutions that support that segment of the market. Why do we find that market to be important? About 35 million small to medium sized businesses across the United States. They represent 70% of job creation. About 400,000 new applications are created every month for small businesses. And it's about 44% of the US GDP. So, a pretty significant part of the US economy. And from a technology standpoint, this market has been underserved for quite some time. And I think
Mhm.
to your point earlier on AI, with AI, we believe there's an opportunity to really shift and create better solutions for these small to medium sized businesses as they continue to, look for ways to drive efficiency, to be more productive, to lower cost.
Mhm.
And what we're seeing is that there's less than, call it 10% of enterprise grade software solutions actually cater to this market. So we believe there's a big opportunity there. So connecting my new passion for small to medium sized businesses and owning a small to medium sized business myself helps me better understand, specifically in this sector, like ways to really think about creating solutions that can help these businesses.
With 1848 Ventures, are you able to talk at all about some of the portfolio companies?
Yeah, I mean, just with a little bit of background. So when I joined 1848, or right before I joined 1848, we had three ventures in the portfolio. One of them, which the team shut down right before I joined. So I joined with two active ventures in the portfolio. We just approved two new investment decisions. So one was for an active company, which is TakeUp.ai, which I mentioned earlier. We That is our first Series A investment as a venture studio. And that allows us to look at a specific seed investment, which is now. Oh, David, you're freezing up. So can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine. Yeah,
Okay.
you're good.
I'm just going to keep going here.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So Take Up is a Series A investment, which we just approved. And that is our first Series A investment as a venture studio. It showcases the fact that we can invest in a seed company, help it scale, get to the metrics that we care about, and invest further capital into that business. And that is, again, in the travel hospitality space. We just approved an investment in a construction tech company called Propel People. They are focused on the labor shortage problem in construction. I'm not sure if you're aware, but there's about a 500,000 skilled labor shortage in construction. And our job is to work with small to medium sized business owners to help them identify and qualify candidates even faster using AI and technology. So, like a job scoring software.
Mhm.
So that was a seed investment we just made. We aim to have two more investments before the end of the year. And we acquired our first company this year. So
Nice.
we're in a very,
Congratulations.
yeah, thank you. So we're on a pretty different trajectory. The goal is to end with at least four companies in the portfolio this year, and then sustainably launch at least two every year moving forward. And the last piece I would just say is, like, we are looking to really expand our overall vision for 1848. So in addition to our core, which is building companies and scaling them through the incubator model, we're also looking at acquisition as a way to really drive new portfolio companies, and also, down the road, direct investment. So how do we invest in entrepreneurs who really meet the thesis and mandate that we have for 1848 Ventures? So we're kind of moving more towards a traditional VC, while traditional VC moves towards the model that we have. So we
Mhm.
think it's a really exciting time, and it's really the early days. So look for more from 1848 Ventures.
Definitely, it sounds like exciting times, and I was surprised at how relatively nascent venture is relative to commerce in general, and it's already changing. I speak to venture capitalists in Europe and North America, and I guess around the time of the pandemic, there were some fundamental changes. It sounds like moving more towards perhaps a private equity or acquisition entrepreneurship model, at least. Perhaps a smattering or like a mix of that. And also with acquiring businesses, that was something that surprised me because I thought, like when you say acquiring a business, it sounds pretty straightforward, pretty simple. I have money, you have a business, let's buy it. And it's I've spoken to many people in private equity who talk about it like it's an Olympic event. Like you have other people trying to buy the business, you have perhaps a disagreement on multiples, you have perhaps I mean, there's so much complexity to coming up with a value and terms. What surprised you about that process coming from venture capital to acquiring businesses?
Yeah, and we had our first acquisition, as I mentioned, so we're still in the early days of experimenting and learning here. That's everything we do is experimenting and learning at these early stages.
I like
But
it.
I think I think similar to what you've learned, it's the same thing. It's like yes, it's not a as easy as we want to acquire this company and we have the highest bid. What is the most value that's being created for the acquirer or the acquiree? How will the technology be implemented? Is the team a good fit from a cultural standpoint? Does it accelerate something that we've already started, or can it be a standalone business? Do we believe the revenue opportunity is as large as is shared as a part of the acquisition strategy?
Mm.
And do they have clean data? Do they have clean financials? Are their contracts structured the right way? So there's a lot of detail that you have to go through, even for a small acquisition.
Hmm.
But you have to ensure that you go through that detail to make sure you're acquiring the right business, and you're not only you're acquiring it, but incorporating it or embedding it into your organization in a way that allows you to really create the value you're looking for. I won't name the name of the organization, but I've worked in organizations before where they acquired quite a few businesses and they never fully integrated them into the company. So you had all these fiefdoms of culture and all these different organizations that didn't feel like the enterprise itself, and that's something you really want to avoid. So that's how we think about it: like test, learn,
Hmm.
really go through the details and do our diligence,
Hmm.
so we can find the right opportunities for 1848 Ventures. And then I think your other point, which is really around the entrepreneurship through acquisition, we're seeing that as a huge phenomena today, and it kind of fits squarely into what we're doing at 1848. 53% of small to medium sized business owners are over the age of 55. There's this term out there called the silver tsunami. And what that really means is that there's this aging population, and that aging population is either doing one of two things. They're handing down that business to somebody within their own family, or they're selling their business, but there's this overall generational transfer that's happening. And you're seeing these new owners coming in who are, you know, AI native, digitally first, and really want technology to solve some of the problems that historically may have been managed manually or through paper and spreadsheets.
Hmm.
AI can handle a lot of that today. So we believe, again, another big tailwind for us is the fact that there is this shift that's happening, and there's a set of customers and constituents who really want to leverage technology to help them drive more productivity, more efficiency, and ultimately higher profit for these
Hmm.
businesses, right? So you're seeing this happen, and it's almost like these few different tailwinds coming together and accelerating this idea of entrepreneurship through acquisition.
To your point earlier about having all those conversations when you're an entrepreneur trying to get funding from venture capital, I think the same is true when you're trying to acquire a company because the due diligence process can be quite costly if you get it wrong. Sometimes you don't know from the outside. You got presented data that presented A or B, and it turned out to be option like Y or something like that.
Right.
And it's costly both in time. It can take a couple of months sometimes, as well as a not an insignificant amount of capital. And there's only so many times that you can do that and keep your momentum. So I think having those conversations as the acquirer is equally important to kind of know deals, have at least some familiarity, like the old kind of community or network effects, like, oh, I can vouch for Kal. He's, I knew him back in the day. He's selling a business. And so there's at least that kind of accountability.
Yeah, there is. We've come up with different frameworks, forms, documents that kind of walk through the number of companies we look at. I think it's similar to investment as well, where if you're looking at deal flow, if there's maybe one in hundreds, if not thousands, that you'll really start to gain some conviction around ultimately making a decision on investment or not. Similar for us, we look at hundreds, if not thousands, of ideas coming through our research phase to see which of those make it into validation all the way through potentially seed or Series A.
Hmm.
And then from a deal flow perspective, how do you start to look at specific industries, acquisition opportunities, and it is probably one in hundreds, if not thousands, that actually makes sense for your business. How do you find those, right? And then if you find an industry that really makes sense, can you find a set of or a group of companies that can help you really accelerate that opportunity is another way that we think about it.
Hmm.
But yeah, you're right. You're 100% right. It's a long, arduous process sometimes. But when you find that right acquisition or investment, that's where it's all worthwhile.
What frameworks do you use to assess whether a platform is monetization ready?
Yeah, so we go through a few different steps. So within 1848 Ventures, we have so we are an incubator. So we build companies from the ground up. Everything from the initial research stage, identifying a problem in market. So let me take a step back, starting with an industry, seeing if see if there are key pain points that we think we can solve,
Hmm.
finding a set of initial customers that can help us understand if that is a true problem. Once we identify that as a problem, is it a problem that the customer wants solved? And ultimately, if we do solve it, are they willing to pay for it? Right. So we start off with research. We also go through a prototyping process where we build products early, call them pre MVP. We bring them to market so we can experiment with customers. We go through a full validation stage. That then leads to pre seed, seed, and ultimately into other investment opportunities. So that's a framework that we use within what we call the innovation engine. So we call it research, validation, prototyping, pre-seed, seed, and then potentially for the further investments as we move forward. We've embraced the OKRs as a model that we use for really driving results at 1848 Ventures. I've been using OKRs since the early days of Google, and I've brought them everywhere that I've ever worked. But the idea of establishing a set of key objectives
Hmm.
and what are the key results that we want to drive in any given period, be it a quarter, be it annually, and then really using those as a way to create what the company would focus on, and then having each team and each individual ladder up to those. So that's something that we use across the organization.
You mentioned smaller businesses and also massive enterprise previously. What do you think founders consistently get wrong about monetization?
Yeah, I think thinking about it maybe too late and really bringing that in earlier into the conversation. So that's one of the things that we've done at 1848 Ventures is we've started to think about go to market and monetization earlier in that incubation process. Like I said, I've been here for a little over a year now. Prior to me joining, the idea of monetization and go to market was really further in that process, more towards that seed stage, and we've now brought it much closer to those early stages. So in addition to asking the question, if we solve a problem, will the customer pay for it? Or what's the right business model, right? Is it a sales-led approach? Is it a product-led approach? How do we think about pricing? What will the customer pay? All of those steps now come in a lot earlier. I would really advise founders, especially in this day and age, as you're thinking about building products and solutions, and ultimately, great companies, how do you think about, monetization earlier in that journey? I don't think you want to just bolt on a solution that really drives revenue down the road because that gets really hard for the customer to understand.
With Flipboard and Spotify in particular, there's this tension between experience quality and ad revenue pressure. How did you balance that?
Yeah, so I'll start with Spotify. I think the great thing about the Spotify model is that there was always like a two-tier approach here. There was a freemium model basically, where there was a free product, and then ultimately you had the subscription model. And having the ability for a user to come into your product, use it, understand the value of it, and then create the right mechanisms to convert into a paying subscriber was a big part of the strategy at Spotify. Within the free product that was ad based, what we tried to do is create the best ad experience possible. So what does that mean? frequency of ads as you join the platform. So not playing too many ads, but enough to help monetize the content, but also the most relevant ads, right? How do you create the most relevant experience that is catered to the content that you're listening to? Um, Sometimes with promotion, so the idea of a larger promotion by a brand around a playlist, this idea of creating a ad-free experience if you listen to an ad up front, so your music wasn't interrupted, but finding those products and services and experiences that made the free experience or the ad experience better for the user, with the ultimate goal of conversion. And with Flipboard, similarly, like, how do you create an ad experience that fits within the application in a way that isn't too intrusive? And in the early days of Flipboard, it was really like this magazine style, high gloss, high type of a ad touch that felt like very unique to the experience. So
Mhm.
really creating those ad experiences that meet the product and the service, and creating in a way that's most relevant and the most user friendly.
If you were rebuilding the content ecosystem today, how would you design it differently?
Yeah, it's a question that I've thought about. I almost went on the journey to build it. I've decided not to do that, and then obviously we're focusing on 1848. But one of the things that I think is most important is really putting the power in the hands of the user. So your point on ads and ads experience. There's a lot of data that's shared from a user perspective when you're on a platform and you're listening, viewing, reading content. How do you take control of your data? And I think one experience that I think is interesting is how, based on the type of information that you share, the different type of access points that you get. So if you're sharing, call it your like your name, age, and location, maybe there's an experience that you get that is a little bit more tailored to you than without sharing any information, but really
Mm.
leaving those choices up to the end user, and that creating an ability to create a new way to really create that relationship. And in some cases, I think that could also help with the ad product as well. The more you share that you are willing to share or comfortable sharing, you can have different offers or services that could be available to you. If you're willing to share less, maybe it's a little bit more of a generic experience. But I think this idea of really putting the control back into the hands of the user um, is where I see a lot of value as you think about content moving forward.
What separates the founders or operators who go the distance?
And when you say go the distance,
I guess the ones that succeed, you mentioned going from pre-seed, seed, Series A, and
yeah,
on, perhaps.
yeah, I think you have. That's a great question, and from my experience, the startup experience of building a company has the highs are high and the lows are sometimes very low, right? Like, you're kind of going on this journey where every day is very different. One day you win a big customer, or land develop a new product that gains a lot of users. The next day you're running into challenges where the product doesn't work. But it's really about that, having a vision and really thinking about the long game, right? You're not going to be successful with a startup or an early stage venture in a short amount of time. Like, there are those success stories, but those are anomalies, right? Most businesses take quite some time to develop. And really keeping focus on that long game, I think, is really the important part of any founder's journey. Staying true to the mission, staying true to your North Star goals, staying true to what the customer or the user is expecting from your product or from your service. And I think that long-term vision versus short-term like wins is really where I think you're going to find value. The biggest challenge I think a lot of founders face is when they hear either customer feedback or user feedback, and your backlog of future development becomes way too long, and some of it may or may not make sense. The idea of really staying true to that vision and what you're building towards, I think, is where you know really separates the true founders from folks who sometimes I think end up kind of losing sight of that vision.
You've managed massive teams across continents. How do you approach culture at scale?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think number one, it starts by a lot more listening than talking. The idea of really understanding a person's perspective, understanding how to best bring their cultural view into the larger view of the organization, and establishing a set of norms that really work for your organization or for your company. I always like to joke that over the course of my time at Spotify, that the Swedish team became a lot more American and the American team became a lot more Swedish.
Mhm.
We kind of met in the middle. And what does that mean, right? So in the US, we have a culture of really that independent individual winner. In a country like Sweden, it is truly about the team, right? And we saw that early on. An example of that is I think we tried to create some sort of award for an individual. And I think the Swedish team or the engineer, I think it was the product and engineering team, basically said, well, that's not how we do things here. It's really about the team environment. So learning from those experiences and helping to really drive a culture that really meets the best of all worlds
Mhm.
is how you go about it. And a lot of it starts with just really understanding, who you're working with, spending time with them, building that trust, building that relationship, and then expanding that into the culture that you want to create. But ensuring that it's not your culture, it's really a culture that's built across the team, understanding those different perspectives.
At 1848 Ventures, how do you think about early stage conviction? What are the green lights you look for that others might miss?
Yeah, I think going back to some of the things we shared earlier, this idea of really, we don't build AI native solutions for just the simple sake of building AI native solutions. It's really understanding the industry or the sub industry, spending time with customers, understanding that there's a problem there, and ultimately getting to that point of willingness to pay. That's really important for us. How do we ensure that what we're building is not only solving a problem, but we are a for-profit business, and how do we create companies that we believe can have not only a revenue impact for those ventures, but a return on capital for the investments that we're making. We look at niche markets where we think are still big enough for us to play in. I use TakeUp.ai as one of the examples of our one of our investments. We just invested in a Series A round, a total of $11 million raised for Take Up. They focus in the travel. They focus in the travel and hospitality space. They're a price optimization engine for bed and breakfasts. Bed and breakfast is a very call it a niche market with a very large revenue potential, and it's very underserved from a pricing optimization technology perspective. And we've been able to help hundreds of customers really focus on driving more revenue and optimizing the value of that room. We
Mhm.
just released a case study that one of our small to medium sized bed and breakfast owners, not only do we save them about 15 hours a week because of this tool, but we've been able to help them generate more revenue where they've added two more rooms to their bed and breakfast. And that's the power of what technology can now bring to this small to medium sized business market.
Mhm.
And that's just one example of how we see value in what we do. But that conviction really starts with, is there a real problem to solve? Is the market underserved? Is the market big enough for our mandate or thesis? And ultimately, is that something that's going to create real value for the small to medium sized business owner?
Is there anything you believed early in your career that you no longer believe?
Yeah, it goes back to I think a question you had asked earlier, David. The idea of what do you, from an operational standpoint, what do you need to be successful? And I think when I working at some of the companies I've worked at, even though they were very early stage, they were still later from an investment standpoint, from a product development standpoint. And I think the best advice I ever got is when I started Sounder, and the individual who shared it with me basically said, you need to unlearn everything that you've learned throughout your career, because that 0 to 1 experience is very different than a 1 to 2 or a 2 to 3 or anything bigger than that. And I came from a world where operations and process and structure and scaling were the biggest parts of the journey. And when you're at that early stage startup where you're launching the first website, where you're trying to find that first investor, that first customer, there is no process. Like you're trying everything. You're experimenting, you're really trying to figure out what is the right model for your business. And being able to stay fast, being able to stay nimble, Having what I'll call low friction process in the way that you work versus
Mm,
scaled process is, I
mm,
think, that was a big learning for me.
mm.
And, finding that within what we do at 1848 is really important because there are parts of the studio where we want to have more operational rigor, more investment discipline, and really driving the right capital decisions. And then within the ventures, which are still early stage, ensuring that we're not creating too much structure, too much process for them to go experiment, to go learn, to find those first customers. So it's a balance and it's a conversation we have every single day. So I don't think there's a playbook for this, just to be clear, but
Mhm.
there is, I think the right way to approach it is to ensure that we're having that conversation daily and ensuring that we're doing the right thing for the studio, as well as making sure that we're doing the right thing for each of our early stage ventures.
When you mentioned there was no process with getting that first client, you're just trying whatever works. The image that came up was like swimming in the middle of the ocean, looking for land, but being distracted by what kind of crops you want to grow when you get there. It's like
Yeah.
first just get there and then see what kind of soil you're working with, etc.
That's exactly right. And what I going back to what we talked about earlier as well, like just having as many conversations as possible. And that is with investors, that's with customers, that's with other industry experts. It's joining different, industry groups in that specific space that you're operating in. It's all about learning, and those learnings will help you further define and refine the process, the customer strategy, the product strategy. But it's really about that, having those conversations and taking those learnings in.
You mentioned a lot of good feedback so far for folks, perhaps starting their careers as well as looking back. What would you tell your 25-year-old self working at Google?
It's a great question. I think the top thing that comes to mind is really this idea of really ensuring that you are capturing all the learnings from the people around you. I was fortunate enough to work with some of the smartest salespeople, marketers, product engineering, and I'm not sure if like as much as I learned, I'm not sure if I fully appreciated who I had around me to help me really, as I think about my career and the places I focus now. Marketing is one example of that. At all the companies I've worked at, I've worked with some of the best marketers in the world, and I took it for granted. Right? I didn't make it a focus for myself. I didn't think about marketing as something that was important in the work that I did at those companies or generally as a function, and I was dead wrong. Right? I think with Sounder as my first kind of foray into trying to be a full-time marketer alongside everything else,
Mm.
you quickly realize that raising awareness for your brand, being out there in market and talking about your vision, your strategy, your mission, and really elevating what you're trying to build is pretty critical. So again, don't take for granted the people you have around you. Really try to learn from every single person that you interact with, and try to create value for yourself from those conversations. And I guarantee you, if it's not something of value today, throughout your career, it will create value for you at some point.
That's such a good point. It's sometimes lost that there's like coding in your like genome that basically it could skip a generation. Maybe the environment wasn't right to kind of crack that nut or whatever, and then all of a sudden it's there though. And similar with like conversations you've had or experience, perhaps a language you tried to learn and didn't actually work professionally using it. These things tend to like cross pollinate over time in unexpected ways. As long as you're being active, I don't think there's, well, I should say there's often an unexpected treasure that can come from that.
Oh, yeah, 100%. And sometimes when you realize it late and you're like, oh, wow, I had, like I said, some of the best people around me and I didn't take the opportunity. My advice would be take that opportunity. When you have great people around you, take the time, schedule a coffee, schedule 30 minutes, learn from them, understand their pain points, understand their vision. And I think it'll just make you a better, well-rounded individual, not only in your current role, but as you continue to grow your business or your career.
Fully agree. Have you worked with a coach yourself, like a business coach or an executive coach?
I do. I work with one at the moment.
And what is a shift that happened for you, if anything?
I think, especially in my role today, it's helping to drive more clarity and alignment across my leadership team, but also across the organization. How do we create clear, concise messaging? How do we follow up on what we've discussed? And how do we really drive, again, that idea of clarity and alignment? Really focusing on that has been a big part of my coaching experience recently. Yeah.
You may appreciate this, but my kind of aha moment, speaking of latent blooming or germination, the seed that was planted in my mind, I forget if it was 2011, 2012, was the Paris Open between Djokovic and Nadal. So for a long time, Nadal and Federer were untouchable, and Djokovic was this kind of third wheel, like orbiting, and they were like, ah, I don't know if they were really doing that, but it seemed like he'd never be like one of them. And then all of a sudden, he just went on this tear, like 41 match tear, where he was like unbeatable. And as you know, Nadal was basically a clay god, meaning like that was his surface.
Yeah.
And Djokovic was just like the Terminator, and beat him at the Paris Open. So not only did he like demonstrably proved that he does belong there. And I heard the commentators mention that he'd been working with a coach and this and that. And I was like, oh, maybe there's something to working with coaches. When I first saw like boxing, for example, the coaches seemed to be in significant worse shape physically than the boxing counterparts. And I thought it was some kind of sham. Like, what is this guy doing? Like, look at the boxer. Like, he doesn't need him. And then when I saw like Djokovic, it started to stack that maybe there was something to coaching, but it was still within like sports. And then eventually, probably several years later, I learned about executive coaching or business coaching. And I think that it could be applied everywhere as long as there's alignment with the type of coaching and the goals, and it's done ethically. But I think it's a big it's an important part of growth and achievement.
It really is for, senior exec, I think across the spectrum of an organization. I would say for founders, that journey is very lonely sometimes. And having somebody in your corner who can help you navigate those uncharted waters, I think is really important. For folks like myself who, again, come with 25 years of experience, but still have a lot to learn. Working with coaches who have, for me, it's my coach, multiple exits, has been in the startup world, has been in structured, like bigger corporations, and being able to leverage those experiences and not make them your own by any means, just to be clear, but to leverage those experiences to help you navigate and see around corners that sometimes you're not able to see around, I think is really important. So coaching is one aspect that I think would be really helpful for early stage founders, as well as just generally managers and executives. The other part of this is, again, back to that network. How do you find advisors and others who have had these experiences to help you as you continue to grow your business or grow your career? You can't do it alone. They say, I think the cliche is it takes a village, and it truly does, right? It's not a one person show. You may be the CEO or the founder, but you need a really great network of folks, both internally on your team, but also around you to ensure that you continue to grow, you're not getting stuck, and you're really kind of moving the ball forward in a way that really is meaningful for you and for the organization.
I fully agree. Admittedly, I used to look at CEOs as like titans and these heroes. And the more that I spoke with them and learned about being a CEO, the more I learned that they rely on a massive team, and their superpower, probably case by case, of course, there's different styles, but the superpower is being able to activate and lead very capable teams, many of which are smarter than them and more capable than them. And so it really kind of changed it's taking nothing away from as a matter of fact, I have even more respect for them, ironically, from not thinking of them in the singular kind of like Titan fashion, but more just the complexity and the stability and the agility, I guess, to start a rhyming series there, that they have to lead with. And yeah, I fully agree. I think there's also something in nature with like alpha, beta. I think they might have been gorillas that the same thing showed up. Like the most successful, I don't know if you call them tribes or whatever, but were the ones where the alpha gorilla had a cadre or like this group of like betas kind of watching his back and helping out in different ways. And it does take a village. It's a, I guess the survival of the fittest is like adaptability and this team sport.
Yeah,
And
especially in business, I think you're right. It's this idea of, there's a couple other lessons that I learned in the early days of Google. Was really around hire people that are way smarter than you, two, number one, hire people way smarter than you and then get out of their way. And two, automate yourself out of your job within the next 12 months. Like that was
Mhm.
like two things that kind of stuck out in the early days. On the first part, though, what we're talking about here is like, yes, you want to find people who really complement the areas where you don't have, the most expertise, but also, yes, not only capable people, but really people who are much smarter than you. And building that trust, building that relationship, and letting them do what they were hired to do is really important. It can be a challenge. It can be a challenge for everybody, including myself. That sometimes you want to get involved in areas because you feel like you have the right answer. um, Ensuring that you're really allowing your leadership team and ultimately all of your teams to really drive the vision, the product, the service, the goals forward. It really does take a team and a village to do that. So we try to do that quite often. I can't say we get it right all the time, but that is something that we do focus on. But it all starts with, I think, bringing in the right level of talent, right? So how do you find the right individual or teams for what you're building, ensuring that you are bringing on folks that, again, support and are really complementing your skill set, and then letting them run. And I think that's an important part of any team and any journey that you go.
Your career spans both the lead up and the .com boom and bust, and then into VC and Silicon Valley, and now we see AI coming. I don't even know what it's being categorized as, like the Industrial Revolution cubed or something like that. What do you make of the next 25 years? Do you think we're going? And I am somewhat putting it on the spot, admittedly, but do you just generally think that we'll reach like this plateau where another level of stability like post industrial, or do you think this is just the new hockey stick and it's going to be changed every single day?
First of all, that was a very nice way of saying that I'm very old, so I appreciate that. Uh,
Experienced,
Experience.
seasoned.
That's a much better word. Yes. It's early days for AI, and I think we are going to be on this upward trajectory for quite some time. I think we're in this compounding effect for quite some time. What that timeline looks like, what that horizon looks like, I'm not sure. But the advice that I give my team and I would give here is that embrace it. Right,
Mm-hmm.
it's not going away.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you've heard the phrase that whatever AI you're using today is going to be the worst AI that exists because it only gets better every single day. And we have an opportunity to embrace new technology that will reimagine the way we work, reimagine the world we live in, and it will go from being intelligent to super intelligent, as I'm sure you've heard in the latest meta release. But also, it's going to show up in different ways. It's going to show up not only on your mobile device, it's going to show up more proactive and active in your home, even further integrated into your mobility, into your health. Every aspect of your life will be reimagined because of the tools and services that are now being created,
Mm-hmm.
and they're only going to get better over time. So I think we're on a very different journey. Both positive and in many ways could also be negative. But it's not going away, and I think if anything, it's going to only speed up, not slow down.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. I'm mostly excited, but
Yeah,
also you just
same.
wonder, like, what is the world going to look like in 10 years? It's kind of fascinating and a little sprinkle of terrifying too.
Yeah, I said this. So when we started Sounder in 2019, we were focused on audio and we were also talking about voice back then. We never got to the voice part of the journey, but um, I back then I had said that when I have a daughter, when she gets older, she's 10 now, but when she was like in her teenage years, that it would be, she would wake up and instead of her talking to, a hub device, you know, the house would talk to her. And, the idea that she is, so there's a new version of alarm that wakes her up in the morning. There are body scans in the house or in her room that talk about her temperature and, what type of, her health, and give her like a health rating almost every single day.
Mhm.
And then there would be, a question around what she'd like to have for breakfast, all the way through her entire itinerary schedule and getting into a vehicle that will just, take her to where she needs to go.
Mhm.
I don't think that world is that far away, to be honest with you. And it's sometimes it can sound scary, but it can also be really empowering, right? So, how do you embrace technology? How do you really, create more empowerment around that technology? And I think to your point, how do you avoid some of the pitfalls that come with it as well? And I think it's going to be quite a bit of learning, quite a bit of testing and experimentation, and I'm an optimist, so I think it's going to hopefully be for the better of society versus worse for society.
Agreed. Where can people follow you, get in touch with you, see what you're doing?
Yeah, you can reach out at Kal Amin at 1848ventures.com, and happy to engage.
Great. Thanks for chatting today. It's really interesting hearing about your background and learning from your insights.
Yeah, thank you, David. Thanks for the time.